After the BBC's rogue reporter humiliation, the backlash from royalty, politics and within. The Prime Minister expressing his concern. One former executive resigns from his regulatory post, and the questions, including those posed by an heir to the throne, which stretch to the very top and into the recent past, those questions remain unanswered. Also tonight, how is the UK helping or hindering the push to share out vaccines across the globe? And Sebastião Salgado, one of the world's greatest photographers, is back with a stunning black and white journey above and within the Amazon at a time when a fifth of its rainforest has been lost. Good evening. What on earth was he thinking? How did a journalist paid to seek the truth on behalf of licence fee payers fake and forged documents to ingratiate himself with a vulnerable woman? It may have been a quarter of a century ago, but there was then a litany of failures in governance that saw this inexplicable occurrence excused, played down and ignored. Most egregious aspect of this, perhaps, is that those who correctly tried to blow the whistle for the good of the BBC itself found themselves, according to an internal document, picked off as troublemakers, one by one. The actions have given carte blanche for the corporation's sceptics to pile in about how the way in which the BBC is structured, its lines of accountability and its future. But others fear that the baby of the corporation's editorial independence risks being thrown out with the bathwater. Here is our political editor, Nick Watt. So, Nick, is the government using this moment to change the way that the BBC is structured?
Well, Faisal, a close government eye on the BBC, but I do have to say tonight I'm detecting a slight change in the government's tone towards the BBC. So yesterday, the Culture Secretary, Oliver Dowden, he was very quick out of the block, saying there's a planned mid-term review of the Royal Charter, the BBC Royal Charter, next year, and that would be a chance to see whether there is a need for further governance reforms. Now, that process will still go ahead, but I'm being told that the review is only ever intended as a health check, that the government could use that point to have future further government reforms. But then listen to this. The BBC may be able to do it themselves. So today I've been looking at this real moment of peril for the BBC. Imbued with history, shaping the nation's conversation for nearly a century, but never plain sailing. Moments of deep trouble where the BBC has to renew its bond with the British people. And one such moment has blown up after a definitive finding that a seminal piece of BBC journalism was secured through deceit. The government is watching the BBC carefully, and a clear message today that it has to take the first step.
I am obviously concerned by the findings of Lord Dyson's report. I'm very grateful to him for what he's done. I can only imagine the feelings of the royal family, and I hope very much that the BBC will be taking every possible step to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again.
A Prime Minister angered by past behaviour, but pulling his punches on possible future changes. Boris Johnson's usual mantra about the BBC is reform, not revolution. And for the moment, he appears to be allowing the BBC management to lead the response and to ensure that this episode can never happen again. Ministers will be reviewing the BBC Charter at its midpoint next year and seeing whether further governance reforms are needed. They've expressed interest in a proposal by the former BBC chairman Lord Grade for a new independent editorial board. This would include journalists and could ask tough questions after programmes have aired. But the talk in Whitehall tonight is that the Charter review is just a health check and that the current BBC board could be allowed to carry out the job of improving BBC governance. And of course, one big change in the last few years is that the BBC is now regulated externally by Ofcom. One Tory MP still wants major change.
For many years, I've maintained the BBC has huge power and authority without proper accountability, and I'm not just sure that an extra executive board is going to deliver that level of accountability. I think the individuals should come forward. I mean, has Bashir used this strategy on somebody else during his career? Why did Lord Hall hire him again and then promote him? I think that if not, there'll have to be matters to answer in front of a select committee. Quite ultimately, this issues less than this brought down the news of the world. I think there is an existential threat to the BBC itself.
A former BBC manager believes the problem must be tackled from inside the corporation.
The governance system has been changed 3 times in the last 15 years. It's for the BBC to prove, not only to government, but much more important to the public, that it can sort itself out. I trust that whatever solution the BBC comes up with to the current crisis, it will be able to retain its independence on behalf of its audience, not just for itself.
With a rich history all around it, the BBC is once again facing a moment of danger and a moment of soul-searching. But the government is giving this generation of leaders the chance to take the first steps in repairing the damage.
Now, Nick Watt is still here. You talked about a health check. Now, how is the rehiring of Martin Bashir in 2016? How healthy is that looking as a decision?
Yeah, so this is obviously a real challenge for the BBC, because this interview was, of course, 25 years ago, but it absolutely plays into the presence, because, as you say, 5 years ago, Martin Bashir was hired as religious affairs correspondent. There was great excitement at this hiring. Jonathan Munro, who was then the head of news gathering, now a very senior figure at the BBC, he sent out an email to BBC staff saying Martin's track record in enterprising journalism, including time in BBC News and at Panorama, is well known and respected in the industry and amongst our audiences. A student of theology, Martin will bring immense knowledge of the brief to his new role. Now, James Harding, who was Director of News at the time, who obviously was instrumental in that hiring, he gave an interview to the BBC this afternoon, and he said he did not know that Martin Bashir had faked bank statements. Had he known, he would not have given him the job. Now, James Harding left the BBC a few years ago, but in that interview with the BBC, he declined to be drawn on whether Lord Hall, who was Director General at the time, had been consulted on this appointment. Important to say that the Director General of the BBC is also Editor-in-Chief, responsible for all output, and Lord Hall did know about those forged documents.
Nick, thanks for that. I'm now joined by Giles Watson, Conservative MP on the Digital, Culture, Media and Sports Committee, Pat Young, a former BBC executive and chair of the campaign group British Broadcasting Challenge, and Emily Bell, professor at the Columbia University School of Journalism. Well, let's start with you, Giles. Your committee chair, Julian Knight, put out a statement. You're going to haul the Director General back in front of your committee, and there's talk of no repeat of serious failings. And no one did their due diligence. What are you going to ask of the Director General?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I hold the BBC in great respect. I mean, for generations, it was the go-to media organ for truth, honesty, openness. And I am so saddened by these events. And it's got to repair. It's got to mend itself. But our job at the DCMS is oversight. Now, I'm not going to second guess Julian Knight or what he's going to say or what he's going to do at the committee. And of course, we have to formulate the questions for the DG when he comes along to talk to us. But Tim Davie has a very good track record. When he was acting DG of the BBC, he dealt with the Savile case. He called those investigations together. And I have absolutely no doubt that he will do the same here and make sure the BBC is fit for purpose.
Just in general terms, Charles, I mean, do you think that the idea of having management that targeted the whistleblowers and promoted the person under closest attention for doing this, do you think that that is tenable? Do you think that their positions are tenable? We've had one resignation from Ofcom today.
I think that there's a serious question about the governance and there's a serious question about management in this. It looks from the outside as if people closed ranks. It looks as if it was protecting itself. It's a monolithic organisation and it needs proper oversight. I think there may be heads having to roll in this case.
And for example, you heard there from Nick Watt about Lord Hall. I mean, he still has public office at the National Gallery. Do you think he should still be in charge of that?
Well, I'm no doubt that Lord Hall did the very best he could. But if he knew about these disgraceful actions of Martin Bashir, falsifying accounts, etc., then he should have acted, and he should be called to account for that.
Well, Pat Young, let's bring you in. I mean, you're campaigning for the future of public broadcasting. I mean, I think you recognise that this is a total mess and a crisis. Surely you recognise some of the concerns expressed there by Giles Watson.
Yeah, look, it's been a devastating week for the BBC. It's not just the actions of Martin Bashir and the failure of management to investigate, but also the devastating impact it had on Matt Weasler and other people who blew the whistle. And that has clearly affected the culture. But I also do think we need to keep it in proportion. Panorama is just one programme within the BBC. The BBC is not Panorama. It maybe, news people might find that hard to believe, but the BBC is not Panorama. The BBC is television.
But this wasn't just, I mean, this went up the management chain, though, as well. It wasn't just Panorama.
It went up the management chain within news and current affairs. It did not go through television. It did not go through children. It didn't go through national and regional broadcasting. It didn't go through sport, radio, world service. So we need to keep a sense of proportion. Yes, it is serious and it is significant.
But you're arguing it's not systemic or structural. That's what you're arguing.
There was a structural issue within one division, and the people in that division have left. It's 25 years ago. I mean, the governance issue has been resolved because you now have a truly independent external regulator of the BBC, which we didn't have at the time. And so I'm not saying it's not serious. It is serious.
Yeah. What, are you saying the princes are sort of over-egging this in their criticism?
No, I'm not going to question the understandable anger of a young man who saw his mother die in such horrific circumstances and watched the very public breakdown of his parents' marriage. I'm not going to question that. But his brother also said that then and now it is bigger than one outlet, one network, or one publication, and he's right. And so I do think there just needs to be a sense of proportion.
Emily Bell, you're a keen watcher of the BBC, the British media, for many years. BBC's been through some crises, but an heir to the throne, attacking it publicly on the 10 o'clock news.
Yes, I mean this is a bad moment, but Pat's right. It was 25 years ago, and we've had big existential crises at the BBC since then, notably the Hutton inquiry and the whole David Kelly affair with the Iraq war, and then the Savile affair. And it's interesting how often these existential crises boil down to mistakes, overreaching, and in this case, actually out-and-out deceit around one editorial decision. And I think it's fair to say that if every organisation that does ambitious journalism at some point faces a crisis similar to this, but at the BBC, it's, if you like, more severe because of the political nature of the BBC's existence in British life.
Well, because the public fund it, Emily, because the public are obliged to fund it.
Yeah, and I think that means that the BBC has a different standard of care towards the public, and it needs to have processes and cultures that reflect that. And I think by and large in the past it has had those. The worrying thing about this episode, or rather the question to be asking, is when this happens again, or when something like this happens again, are the processes there to properly frisk the journalism, to give public accountability, really, in the journalistic processes? And you would hope that this hint by the government that they would allow the BBC to think about those internal processes and get them right is actually that's the right way to do this, I think.
Yeah, let me pick that up with Giles there. Nick Watt reporting there that maybe there's a sense coming out of government from his sources that the new management at the BBC, the chairman and the director general, relatively new in post, that the government may give them the opportunity to sort this out themselves.
Well, I think that they are close to the workings of the BBC, of course, I believe the new Director General, Tim Davie, has only been there since September. So he's only just got his feet under the desk and he's got to deal with this. But fundamentally, there is something wrong. And it does look like there's been some sort of cover-up. And the moment this wrongdoing was discovered, the thing to do is to own up straight away. Then you can be clear, and then we can go back to trusting the BBC. As you said in your piece at the very beginning, it's broken the bond with the British people, and it has to mend itself. It's physician, heal thyself.
Okay,
I
but
agree.
Pat,
sorry.
yes. Go on.
No, I mean, I agree. And, the BBC, we all had I remember I was there when we were given the new values. Trust is at the heart of everything we do. And this is a breach of trust. It's a breach of trust with the public, with the audience, and also with the staff. And so, we talk about, Tim has only been in post in September, and he was already, he did commission an independent report from a judge. Yeah. He has published it in full. He's apologised unreservedly. And if you've been listening to the BBC all day, this has been the only story on the BBC all day, and I can tell you to be.
I should say, and other channels, Pat, too.
And other channels too.
But
are
you? This is not just self-flagellation here. There's general interest in this. But Pat, do you think you are trying to defend? You think the BBC and other broadcasters are under their editorial independence is under some sort of attack? I
believe that
here it's bang to rights, isn't it? The criticism.
No, this is, as I said, this is one incident on one show, all right? You can't condemn the whole system of public service broadcasting because of a rogue journalist and a
I can see Giles disagreeing.
No, I do disagree because it is clearly a fault in management and therefore it's systemic. And so something needs to be looked at very closely. And if it comes before the DCS committee, we should do that.
I didn't say things didn't need to be looked at. I said you can't condemn the whole system of public service broadcasting, which isn't just the BBC. It's ITV, it's Channel 4, it's Channel 5, it's S4C, Scottish TV, Ulster.
I don't think Giles is doing that, to be fair. But let's bring in Emily. There's a bigger sort of vista here, is there not, of rapid change in the way that we consume media and the BBC's place within this.
Yeah, I think that, in journalism more generally, so if you think about the real threats that there are to journalism and journalistic independence everywhere now, whether it's governments commissioning misinformation, whether it's people hacking and leaking large troves of documents to serve their own political interests, journalism has to be on its toes and in a defensive pose as well as investigating these things in a way it never has had to before. And in some ways, I think that speaks to needing to change these processes anyway, even if there wasn't an existential crisis, because you are just going to have to give much more accountability about your processes as a journalistic organisation to frankly distinguish yourself from all of the other manufacturers of information who are out there now, who don't have that bond with the public, and trust is easily lost. You lose your reputation in a second, and building it back is hard. Fortunately, the BBC has a massive amount of great journalism, which hasn't got flaws in it, is done by honest journalists, but you have to have a process in place internally which allows you to demonstrate these processes much more clearly, I think, to everybody.
Well, Emily Bell, Giles Watson, Pat Young, thanks very much for joining us. More to be said on that, no doubt. Now, who around the globe should get precious supplies of COVID vaccines? The government is pondering that ahead of the G7 summit next month, with some radical thinking emerging from President Biden's administration, for example. But Newsnight has seen a letter to the Prime Minister from leading charities complaining that only a select group of wealthy nations and industry are drawing up the blueprint, excluding those nations worst hit by lack of vaccine, as health correspondent Deb Cohen reports.
Across the world, populations are being vaccinated against COVID-19, but this map shows how the rich countries have had far more access to vaccines than the poorer ones. The darker the colour, the more people vaccinated. There's a global shortage of vaccine, and there's no agreement on how to remedy it. Countries such as India and South Africa are angry that patents forbid them from making the vaccines themselves. The US and the European Parliament are happy to waive those patents, but the UK isn't. The UK say their approach of backing AstraZeneca has led to 400 million doses given around the world at cost, and that they're backing the COVAX programme too. Now, Newsnight has been passed a letter signed by some of the world's leading aid organisations. They've written to Boris Johnson in his role as current chair of the G7 group of nations. They accuse the UK of concocting a plan for global vaccination that includes governments of wealthy nations and pharma multinationals, but excludes those they say should be at the forefront of it. In a letter to the PM, they say,
"There has been no inclusion of low and middle income country governments in the creation of this partnership, nor in the decision-making around its agenda. In other words, this partnership excludes the very countries who are on the front line of the unequal distribution of COVID-19 health tools and whose voices need to be heard the loudest."
They argue it is individual governments who best understand their own needs and ability to produce vaccines.
What we have here is an industry-led partnership to effectively write the script of the UK's G7 presidency. And not only that, the panel totally excludes the governments and the communities around the world who are worst affected by the current vaccine inequality. So what we have here is a model that is very, very successful at creating billionaires and adding to the wealth of existing billionaires already who have vested interests in these pharmaceutical corporations, but a system that is terrible and is failing at ensuring access to the billions of people who are currently unprotected.
But the biotech industry back the PM's focus.
It's really industry and the companies like BioNTech and Moderna that have produced some of the breakthroughs that have made the difference at the early stage for this one. And it's right to have them in at the table for the next time. I think it's also vital that we work with colleagues around the world to make sure that we're doing three things: being able to build vaccines for the future, being able to have healthcare systems able to deploy those vaccines, and have populations that are keen to take up those vaccines when they're available.
The Boris Johnson plan for the future tallies with where we are now. At the meeting of the G20 nations in Italy today, leaders backed a system where the industry would voluntarily allow others to make their vaccines. But will that work?
We believe that voluntary licenses have not worked, have been abused by the pharmaceutical industry, and is part of the problem. And so we have suggested that in contradiction, we should look at passing a waiver to ensure that everyone who can produce should produce.
Getting people vaccinated quickly in the African continent is crucial. A study released today reported nearly half of all people critically ill with COVID in Africa end up dying, far more than any other continent. Some have argued that low and middle income countries aren't able to produce their own vaccines. Entirely untrue, say others.
There is a lot of production capacity in developing countries. The World Health Organization has a pre-qualifier program for vaccine producers, and over half of the 140 or so producers are actually from developing countries. So from that point of view, I don't believe that the narrative out there that it's too complex to produce is anything to go by.
Nobody argues that the current vaccines have been rolled out fast enough globally. What is disputed is how to fix the unequal distribution.
Debco in there. Sebastião Salgado, one of the world's greatest photographers, is back with a stunning black and white journey above and within the Amazon at a time when a fifth of the jungle is removed. The book is out today, while the exhibition begins with the accompaniment of French composer JeanMichel Jarre in Paris and moves to the Science Museum in the autumn. He reflects on an art now democratised and available to all, on climate change and the risks of a world that might be lost. And I spoke to him earlier today from Paris. I began by asking him what story he was trying to tell in this project.
Well, my wish that the people that look this book, that they have a new conscience of Amazonia. Is an ecosystem in total danger, the pressure of destruction of this forest is very, very high. And with the destruction of the forest, we are destroying all the Indian communities, the Indian culture.
I'm intrigued to know how did the people that you photographed, how did they get on? What was their conception of what you were trying to do and how these photographs were going to be used?
You see, when you come to an Indian community, say that they are very isolated, they are exactly like us. They are the Homo sapiens. They are the human being. They are not different from me. What is essential for me is essential for them. And when I come to live with them, because I spent a long time, I took 7 years to take this picture. And I come in few days, their home is my home. Their behavior is my behavior. And they don't behave different from me. We are exactly the same.
How aware are they of the ecological peril in the Amazon?
They are very, very scared about what's going on. They have total conscience that they are under total pressure and that the forest has disappeared. Mr. Bolsonaro, the actual president of Brazil, he's taking care to destroy part of Amazonia, but the destruction of Amazonia started before him many years.
So you mentioned President Bolsonaro. I mean, he was at the President Biden's climate change summit a few weeks ago, and he was promising that Brazil would become climate neutral by 2050. He was talking the language of ecology. What did you make of that?
Well, he went there to get funds too, but his promise is not true. You see, he came back from there. This month in Amazonia, after that he came back, Amazonia is having the biggest destruction ever. He took out all the tools that control the deforestation.
There's this combination in the book of incredibly intimate photographs of people and then these epic landscapes, I think taken potentially from aircraft. Which of those do you prefer?
No, I prefer all of them because all this is Amazonia. When you are flying over Amazonia, you see this incredible space and you know that under there, we have humans that live there inside after thousands of years and are the real guardians of the forest.
I wonder what your reflection is on the fact that photography has been democratized, that now every person has in his or her hands machines capable of doing some of the things your machine could do 20 years ago, and yet they're not observing. It's maybe a little bit more self-referential, narcissistic.
I must make a small observation. This, what you say, is not photography, because it's a new language that we communicate through the image. They are images, but they are not photography. Photography is the history. Photography is the memory. And you see, photography is something tangible. You can touch the photography.
It's been said that this may be, and you can tell us that it's not, this may be your last sort of epic journey. Is this, where do you go from here?
Oh, you see, photographers are liars. When I finished my book called Genesis in 2011, I say, that is my last photography history. And after I went, I did Amazonia. But look, I'm 77 years old. I need 2-3 years to do the presentation of this Amazonian project by the number of shows that's going on in the planet. When I'll be finished this, I will be 80 years old. I put the question, I will have enough energy to go ahead to do a huge project like this. Yet, of course, that will not abandon photography. I continue, but most probably photograph more close to my home.
Well, Sebastian Salgado, thanks so much for joining us and talking us through these extraordinary pictures.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Well, that's all from us for this week. Have a great weekend. Emily will be with you on Monday night. Good night.